What's up, guys? This episode we're going to talk about in-app notifications because this is a feature I get requested almost every single week. So I thought it's about time that we cover this. So what I'm talking about are those little notifications in the Navbar that you usually see. And when you click on them, you'll see like the number, and they'll be able to mark them as read when you read them. And then also they'll have links to take you to the thing that created the notification. So for example, on GoRails, mine's really simple. Needs some cleanup, but it's just a navigation item that generates a menu that links to forum questions. So anybody that posts a question in there, if you get a comment, you'll receive a notification, or if you join a discussion, you'll automatically be subscribed to the comments for that thread. So this is what we're going to be duplicating today. I'm going to talk about how we do this. We're going to load these with Ajax. So we'll create the database models. We'll add them to the records so that when you take an action, if you would like to notify the users, we'll show you how to create the record. And then we'll also build the JavaScript functionality to load these through Ajax. So your page can load quicker. It can load the notifications after the page loads, just like Facebook does. And then we'll also use JavaScript to mark them as read. And then you're going to have a perfect foundation to pull these URLs for notifications every, say, 3 seconds, so that you get relatively real-time notifications if you would like to go ahead and do that. So we're going to talk about all that in this episode. So let's get started. So what goes into creating a notification? Well, you've probably seen a lot of these things like Bob liked your photo on Facebook, or you might see like Anthony shared a link on your wall, or Susie commented on your post, things like that. You're going to see a lot of these like various things where there's an action taken on some object. And all of these are really just like there's a user that took an action on something, and this one was actually a link rather than your wall. So this is just building a sentence that links to something and tells you a little bit about who did what, and it's very generic. So with that in mind, we can create a model to represent that in our database. So let's call this model a notification, of course. And then we're going to have maybe, 5 or 6 different fields on this. First, we're going to need a recipient ID, and that's going to be an integer. And that is you. You're the one that gets the notification, so you're the recipient. Then there's the user who took the action, and maybe we call this actor ID. You could call it user, but it's going to get a little confusing of who did what. So if you were the actor, then maybe you're the one that took the action of the object or something like that. It might be a little more clear than using the term user, but it also might be less clear because it's not, you know that there's a recipient and an actor, but they're both users. You have to have some way of separating the two. So however you choose to name these is up to you, but I'm going to call these separate things and not intentionally use user because we won't know who the user of the notification refers to. Is the recipient or the person who took the action? Kind of hard to tell at a glance without looking at the code. So if you choose different names, you can help clear up that sort of even before that becomes a question. So what else do notifications need? Notifications need a timestamp or some sort of field that can tell the user or the website that the notification has already been read. So I like to use read at as a date time field, and that will just record the time that they marked it as read. Simple as that. You could use Booleans, but it doesn't really give you much useful information. So read at is also maybe a useful thing where you could set up functionality that maybe will email the user if they haven't read the post after 3 hours or something. This could help you a little bit with that, but in any case, red@ as datetime also helps you do analytics in the future, but you're really sort of treating it like a Boolean column. You just get some extra data in there because you know the time that they read it at. So all that aside, the last piece that you really need is the action, and that will be commented, shared, liked, whatever. That'll just be a simple string. And then you need the trackable item. So we're going to use a polymorphic association for this because as you can see, there's photos, links, posts, so on. The list probably will continue growing, but it's always going to be notifications for a vast amount of different things. And you don't need to create like post notifications and link notifications and separate those, because that would just get very confusing. So this is where polymorphic associations come into play again, just like we talked about in our comments episode in the past. So here we have some sort of object that is the notifiable object. So if we call it notifiable ID and notifiable type, and that will be a string, those two can comprise the polymorphic association for notifiable. And that will be the object that you're linking to when someone clicks the notification. So that's all you need in order to create the notification model. And we can run that, run rakedb migrate, and then jump into the model to actually set up the associations and then create those records anytime we need to in the create action. Adding those associations into the model is pretty simple. You've got our belongs to recipient, and that's going to need the option for class name as user because it doesn't directly match. Same thing with the actor. Class name is user and belongs to notifiable, and that one takes the polymorphic as true option. And that's that. So that will set up your associations for the notification. And then you can also have the has many notifications. And then this is going to take the option because it needs to be linked as the recipient on the has many. And so that way you need to link that rather than it will automatically look for user, and that won't work because there is no user association. So you have to specify an option here to link to the recipient. And this is as simple as saying foreign key is recipient ID, and that will take care of that. So with that in mind, now we can go to our forum posts controller and add creating of notifications into that. So when you are posting in a forum, you are browsing a thread and you're like, I know the answer to this guy's question, and you type a message and click create forum post. That would take you to this action. It would create a new post in the thread. It would associate it to you and then save the post. Now here's where we need to create the notifications for the users. Now there's one trick to this that you have to be careful with, but we'll talk about that in just a second. First, we need to just create the association to get all the users in the thread. So we have one user, and if I post, I'll be another user. So we need some association on the forum thread to get all the users. And that's going to be really simple. Has many users, and that's going to be through the forum posts, because the forum post here has a belongs to user, so we can just grab all of those, it should be plural, on the thread and grab all the users through that. So that's going to be nice and will allow us to say forum thread dot users, and for each user we'll create a new notification with that user as the recipient. And that's pretty cool because that allows us to loop through all of those users, notify everybody, and then redirect the user back. And this will be really fast because we're just creating a handful of records in the database. We're not actually sending out emails or anything, which you would want to do in a background job like the previous episode on Sidekick. So the other options we need to pass in for the notification are, let's pull this up again. We need the actor. So we'll pass in the current user as the actor because you're logged in, you clicked submit, so you're the one that made the post, and then that means that you would be current user. And then the action, we'll just say posted for this, and then we'll have the actual notifiable object, which will be the forum post. Now, this forum post is the thing we'll want to link to when you click on the notifications. That's why we're linking that instead of the thread. And that's all you have to do to create those notifications. The important thing that I mentioned we would talk about is there's a little trick to this, because forumthread.users is not actually what you want, because this is going to get you everybody. And because you just created a thread or a post in the thread, that will include you. And that's not what you want, because you would get a notification, as well as if someone posted twice in the thread, they would get notified twice. So you want to actually call unique on this to get the unique users, no duplicates, and then you also want to remove an array of current user. And so if you're ever subtracting two arrays, you need to take the first array, which unique should return, and then remove an array of these items, which is just one, which is your user. So that should give you a unique array. And we should be able to jump into our application, click submit, everything worked fine, and then we should be able to open the Rails console and look at notification.all and see if we got multiple notifications or if it worked right. So I was logged in as user number 2, and we can see the actor ID is number 2. It's not red, which is good. Posted the forum post number 6, and this is a notification for recipient user number 1. So that worked correctly. So exit3 is user number 1, and Chris is user number 2. And so when Chris posts, exit gets a notification, but Chris does not. And then if I go in here and make another post, and we submit that, then we should see a new notification down here. And I also still haven't gotten duplicate notifications as Chris. So this is really cool and is creating our notifications properly. So this is something that you can use in pretty much any location that you would like. You would be able to take this notification line and then pass this around and put it in maybe the forum thread. Maybe you want it on likes, or maybe you want it on sharing photos, anything like that. You have the freedom to take this line of code and reproduce it pretty much anywhere you would like to add notifications into your app. So you can take this and then move it around and use it in multiple places, which is pretty useful. So now that we have our notifications in the database, what do we actually do with them? So how do we get these notifications into the UI and make it something that's very, very flexible? So if you're doing notifications, I would recommend building a notifications endpoint for JSON. So I would make sort of a notifications resource. Maybe you would consider it even a little API in and of itself for your JavaScript to access it. So one thing that you would have to do every single time the page was loaded was look if the user signed in and then display the notifications in the Navbar. But that's one of those things that could be deferred into JavaScript, and that would be totally fine. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to load those notifications with JavaScript, and we're going to provide that with a resources notifications in our routes file. So we're going to have resources notifications, and we're just going to use the index there, but we'll define that in our controller here. So we'll open up app controllers notifications controller.rb class notifications controller application controller, and we'll have our index. And the notifications we're going to load are simply notifications where recipient is current user, and that's going to require us to say before action authenticate user, because we're using devise, so you're going to make sure user's logged in somehow. And then we'll load up the notifications, and we'll probably want to limit those. So we probably want to only do maybe the unread notifications in the navbar. So we can make a scope called unread for notification. So if we open up that model, scope unread, and that's simply going to be where the read at timestamp is nil. And that's all you need to do to make a nifty little notification controller here. So we'll load up all the unread notifications for the current user, and then we'll return some JSON for that. So if we make a directory for app views notifications, we can edit app views notifications index.json.jbuilder. And here we're going to have to design our JSON that we're going to return to the JavaScript. And there's going to be a few helpers that we can do in here that make creating the links easier, for example. And we'll go through the notifications array and pull out some JSON for each of those. So we can use the JBuilder helpers here, such as array, and we just pass in the notifications and a block that takes each one of the notifications themselves, and then we'll have our various things here. So we'll have a recipient, which will be the notification.recipient, JSON.actor, notification.actor, JSON.action, notification.action, JSON.notifiable, notification.notifiable. And here we can also include a JSON URL to link to. And this is the one that you'll probably need to customize based on the type of notifiable object. But in this case, we're going to say forum thread path, and we're going to say notification.notifiable.forum thread and notification.notifiable. And then this will generate the path to the forum thread. And actually we'll want anchor here. And this will be the DOM ID. I think this method for DOM ID is available in the JBuilder file. So what this is going to do is link to the thread itself and then take us down to the notifiable forum post. So that will be a little shortcut to help us generate this URL. We'll do it in Rails. Then our JavaScript doesn't have to worry about trying to figure out how to build URLs. Our JavaScript can just simply take the URL and then put it in the HTML. Now to test and see if this is working, we just want to open up the /notifications.json URL in our browser, and we should get a JSON response back. But because we're logged in as Chris instead of Exid, I have no notifications on this user account, but our other user does. So let's just log out and log back in and then check this out from the other user's perspective. And if we open that up now, we can see that there's some, let's see, at least should be two notifications here with the JSON related to it. So you'll see the recipient. You'll get some information about the recipient. It might just be easiest to pass in the username for the recipient. because we're going to be linking to the post itself and not the user. If you had more complicated formatting, you could pass in this extra data, but we're going to keep it simple and only link to the URL that we added at the bottom. So let's just adjust that really easily, and we'll say username. And the recipient we actually may not need to include whatsoever because we know that it's for you. So we can comment this out or just delete it and simplify our JSON response a lot. Now, the other thing you might have noticed is that we have Chris posted and then blank. So we got this really big piece of JSON here that has every attribute about the notifiable object. We maybe don't need all that stuff because it doesn't make it easy for us to say, Chris posted a comment in a thread or something like that. It doesn't help us really easily pull that out. So I would recommend modifying your JSON to do something that's more flexible. So we have this notification notifiable object here, and why don't we just add a type? So if you were to say let's just say there was a comment. So you could have your JavaScript real easy, put the actor, action, and the type together and say, Chris posted a comment. That would be much, much easier for your JavaScript to put together in the notification and then combine these. If you ever wanted to say Chris and Bob posted a comment, then you could combine those nicely, or Chris posted 2 comments, you name it. This is kind of the design of your JavaScript and your JSON. You want to make it easy for you to write simple JavaScript because there's going to be a bunch of different types. Potentially you liked a photo, shared a link, commented on a status. All of those are going to be different, and if you give it a really basic format here, then your JavaScript can just run through these, be really lightweight and really fast. And it doesn't have to know as much about the server-side stuff, which is a huge, huge improvement. So wouldn't it be nice if you could just take the notifiable thing and said, Chris posted a forum post. So we could actually interpolate a string here and say notification.notifiable. We could take the class and convert it to a string, and we could say let's underscore it. So what we're doing here is we're saying let's take forum post, let's take it, convert it to a string, let's underscore it, which means to say forum post, then let's humanize it. So if we do that, that will convert it to forum post, and then we should be good. So if we do that, that should allow us to automatically generate a forum post as the type string, which is awesome. And it looks like we just need to downcase that first letter so that it all reads nicely as a sentence. So this way, you could pass in any type of object, and as long as it had a reasonable name as your model name, then if you had photo or user, all of those would get converted dynamically into a nice readable string that your JavaScript can render, and that is probably what I would suggest. Now, the next piece that we need to think about in our JSON data structure is what are you going to do for marking these items as read? Now, personally, I want to make this work like Facebook and Twitter, where you click the notifications here at the top and might have a number next to it and say 10 or something. You have 10 notifications. I want to make it so that when you click that, it would remove the number and mark all those items as read. So that's going to be as simple as when you click it, we'll send a mark as read thing over to the server. And that means that you don't need to include IDs of the individual items as arguments to that because you're marking everything as read. But if you ever want to mark individual items as read, you can just say json.id is notification.id, and then that will add the ID number into each of these, which might be just useful to pass in anyways. That will allow you to reference specific notifications from your JavaScript and like DigitalOcean has notifications, you can mark individual ones as read or not. So you can pass in the IDs if you ever want to build functionality like that. So that's pretty cool. And you have complete control to customize this to however you want this experience to work. Now, the other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make a post request for the notifications that allows us to mark them as read. So if we do everything, we can make a collection action. We can make a mark as read action, and then that would map to the notifications controller and a mark as read method. And we're going to look for the notifications where recipient is the current user. And we're going to want the unread ones, just like before. And this time, we're going to update all, and we're going to say read at time.zone.now. And that's all you need to do. And here you can render JSON back and just say success is true or something. You'll use the HTTP response codes like a 400 or a 500 or whatever. Those response codes will be if it fails, and then if it's successful, then they'll get a 200 back, and then they'll also have a little data in the JSON to parse and see if it was successful or not. So that's as simple as that's going to be. You're just going to mark all of those as read, and that's it. So now we need to connect the JavaScript to the front end. So we need to load up the JavaScript when you view this page, need to display notifications here, and then we need to go ahead and mark those as read. So let's dive into that. To actually create the HTML to interact with in the JavaScript, I'm just going to paste in some example code that I found for Bootstrap 4 alpha. Now, this isn't going to look the prettiest because Bootstrap 4 is still in alpha, so the drop downs don't actually align properly, which you'll see in a second, but this is sort of what your HTML will look like for notifications. So if we save this and just refresh the page, you're going to see notifications show up in the sidebar or in the navigation, and you'll see them show up when you click on the drop down. Now, these are just hard coded, and we're going to need to load those up dynamically on the page load. So this is working, and that's basically what we want, but now we need to make it dynamic. Now, to do that, we're going to create a file in app assets JavaScript. I'm going to call it notifications.js.coffee, and we'll open that up here. And I'm also going to open up that HTML on the side so you can reference that while we're doing this. So one thing that you'll notice is that I set this up to only run when this is the user signed in. So we're only going to see the notification bar when the user signed in, which is good because then we can load the JavaScript for it only if this is on the page. So let's create a new class in CoffeeScript called notifications, and in the constructor we'll set it up so that we'll only call the setup method if there's the notifications on the page. Now I'm going to use the data behavior stuff that I've talked about in the past. We'll call it notifications, and the length should be greater than 0 if it's actually on the page. So let's actually just say notification. Let's just call it that, and then we can reference that later. And so we'll create this setup method here when it's actually available. So we'll have the setup method, and then we'll be able to reference that. So that means that we're going to need data behavior equals notifications, and then that should be referenceable there. And let's just test this out and say console.log at notifications. So this should print out the div. It should get called if that's on the page. So we'll refresh our page, and then we'll see this jQuery item, and that means that it's currently working. So it's detecting the notifications on the page, and then the JavaScript is being called. So now that we know that's working, we can use Jquery to make an Ajax request, and this will be to the URL of notifications.json. We can say the data type for it is JSON. We're going to say, we'll do a GET request, and then on success, we can call a different method. So we'll just call it handle success. So we'll have this handle success method with a thick arrow so we can reference the variables the same way as before. And here we'll have the code to actually get the data back. So the first parameter that you'll get with this is the notifications in JavaScript format. So if we refresh this page now, when you look at the console, you'll see you get an array printed out, and that's those notifications that we saw right here, but they've been parsed into JavaScript objects for us because of the Ajax request specifying the data type as JSON. So it parses those out into an array for us, which is handy dandy. And we can say items equals $map, and we can map this array into a set of strings that we can insert into the page. So if we take each notification here and we convert them into this anchor tag, let's take this one as an example and paste that in. Let's change these quotes to ones that are a little easier to work with. And then we'll have just basically we'll take these action, actor, notifiable type, and the URL, and we'll convert that into the HTML that we need to display. So this is really simple. We have notification.actor, notification.action, and notification.notifiable.type. And the last thing should be we change the href to notification.url. And now that we have those items, we should be able to update the this section right here. So we don't want those example ones that we had in the dropdown. We just want this to be our items. So this could be, let's add a data behavior to this, notification items. So then with our jQuery code here, we can say data notification items, or let's see, behavior equals notification items. And the HTML inside of that should be these strings that we just gave it back. So if we did everything correctly here, we should be able to refresh the page, click on this and see Chris posted a forum post. You can't read that because the CSS is still a little broken and it goes off the page. But if we look at it, we're getting the drop-down items. They're linking to the correct place. If you click on them, they will take you to the thread and everything that you would expect out of your notifications. Now, another cool thing that we could do here is we could say, let's add a data behavior on notification, or let's just call it unread count. And you could set the text of that to items.length. And then that would allow you to say, let's put a span behind the bell that's data behavior, unread count, and let's leave it empty by default. So when you refresh this page, you'll see it's blank for a second, and then it changes to 2 after the notifications have been loaded, and you are good to go. Now, the last piece of this puzzle is to get these to clear out when you actually click on this dropdown. So when you click on it, we need to send a notification to the server to mark these as red so that next time you load the page, they don't actually show up. So let's do that last piece and wrap this episode up. So we do this initial load on the setup here. And the other thing that we want to do then is to grab like this anchor tag that is the button type and class of all that. So we can just do a behavior on this and say notifications link, maybe. We'll call it that. And if we do data behavior equals notifications link, then this will allow us to say on click, let's handle the click, and we'll just make a method down here for that. And then here we can take the event. We don't need to do anything with the event actually, but we do need to do an Ajax post to /notifications /mark as read, which is that collection action that we created just a little bit before. And if you want to see that, we can run rake routes, and you'll see here that we have a mark as read notifications path, and that's a post for notifications mark as read. So we don't really need to pass in any data into this. We can do data type as JSON because that's the kind of response we're looking for. And then the other important thing here is that it's a method post. That's the most important thing. And then success for this, we can just keep this here, and we can change the unread count to 0. So let's do this all in line there, and we'll set the unread count to 0. So that will allow us to fire that request off to the server when you click on it. And if we do that, you should see in the network, anytime this is click, you'll see a post request go over. We actually made a typo here, so mark is read. At the bottom, anytime you click this, you'll see the mark is read post request, and we've got a 500 error this time, so we need to check our Rails logs to see what was broken. So we have an update all for nil class that is not currently working, so let's take a look at that. Notifications controller, and that is also because of a typo. So now if we go do this, we click this, it should change to 0, and it does. And then server side, you'll see the post to mark as read, and we update all those notifications and set the read at to the current timestamp. So that's all that it takes to mark those as read. And now you'll see there are 0 unread notifications, and you could put in placeholder text, whatever you would like. All you have to do really is to modify your notifications.js.coffee file and then put in some extra code around the handle success. So this code maybe checks to see if the length of items is 0, and maybe you put in a different message, like there are no new unread notifications. Whatever you'd like, you can fully modify that here. And also, this is just a good little class to handle that functionality, and your JavaScript doesn't do very much of the UI. It just kind of manipulates it as necessary. So this could be a really good episode that we could clone in React and see how this would interact with it. And really the backend JSON API that we have for notifications probably would stay the same. You would just end up writing React instead of Jquery, more or less. So if you're interested in seeing something like that in the future, leave a note in the comments below, and we'll get to that if you guys really want to see it. I would love to do more React stuff anyways. So that's basically the whirlwind tour for all the sort of things to think about when you're building notifications. Keep them simple. Definitely don't try and overdo it. Don't tailor them too closely to specific things. Try and make them generic, because you know that you will use that in other places in your application in the future. Things are bound to change, so if you can make this sort of generic and sort of simple at the same time, then awesome. You have a foundation for notifications that you could probably pull out into even into a gem that you could reuse. Maybe this is something that you guys would like to see as a gem. I don't know. Let me know. Until next time, I will talk to you next week. Peace.